So, when I was a child, and I mean even more of a child than I am right now, I used to love to play outside, especially in the streams near my house. They captivated me. I was a very curious child, and the streams were especially intriguing because they always seemed to be changing. It was never the same water that I'd be splashing in, never the same frogs that I'd catch. And the streams, I found that I really started to care about them, and they became a significant part of my identity. So several years later, I got the opportunity to join the inaugural STEM class of Bangor High School. This is a program focused on science, technology, engineering, and math. But I didn't join it out of any particular love of science. Actually, it was because of the math. I was that weird kid you remember from middle school who was absolutely obsessed with math. But as I progressed through the program, I started to realize that I actually really did love science. And when I was a sophomore, I got the opportunity to take this class. It was called AP Chemistry. And in the class one week, we did an experiment, a lab. It was just a simple Beer's Law experiment, looking at the wavelengths of light and water. But at the end of the experiment, my chemistry teacher, Mr. Kerry James, he told us to go grab a sample of water from a stream near our house, or a pond, or a body of water, and then we'd analyze it. And what we were looking for in the water was this nutrient. It was called phosphorus. And what phosphorus does is when it's in excessive levels in water, it causes algal blooms. And so you've probably seen on the beach the big hunks of green gunk. It makes the rocks really slippery. Well, it does more than just that. The algal blooms are very bad, not only for the environment, but also for human health. And so what happens is that the algae will block out the sunlight and prevent aquatic plants from growing, and then later decompose and reduce the dissolved oxygen in the water, preventing fish from surviving. So you've got damage to the plants, damage to the fish, and then most worryingly, the algae will actually start to produce these toxins sometimes that make the water nearly impossible to drink or use recreationally. It actually turns it into poison and causes dermatitis and eczema on the skin. And so learning about this process in AB chemistry, which is formally known as eutrophication, I thought back to when I was a kid and when I was playing in those streams. And I thought, wow, how many other thousands, no, millions of kids are there around the world who don't even realize that the water they're playing in could be poison? And it was about to get a lot worse because we analyzed that water sample, and I could not believe how much phosphorus was in the water. It was shocking to me. And I suppose that was really a turning point in my life. And I realized that I wanted to do something about this, to find out what was really polluting the streams in my community, and to do something about it to fix that pollution. And so that summer, I got started on a research project with the support of the STEM program behind me. I was very lucky to have a very supportive teacher, Mr. Kerry James. He got me in contact with some researchers at the university so that I could learn the skills that I needed to succeed in research, and also to get the equipment that I needed to build a lab in my basement, which also kudos to my parents for letting me do that. Not every parents would let their kids put together a lab in their basement. So I got everything together, and for the better part of 7 months, worked on collecting water samples and analyzing them for various pollutants. And it was a long process, but by the end of it, I found out that my worst fears were true. The streams were significantly impaired, not only in phosphorus, but also with E. coli, and that pollution was being contributed by stormwater. So at this point, I definitely wanted to do something about it, and I decided to switch gears in my project from the science side to the engineering side. And so I started in on the engineering project the summer before my senior year, and got started working on something is called cellulose nanofiber filter mat. And that is basically a fancy word for wood pulp. But I was hoping to filter out the E. coli and also absorb the phosphorus with that filter mat. The problem was it didn't work at all. It failed over and over and over. No matter what I did, I couldn't get it to work. I actually worked on this for 5 months before I realized in November that I had no shot of getting it to work. And that was a very low point because I had just spent 5 months of my life on something that I couldn't even apply. But as I was thinking over it, I realized that there were lessons that I learned from that. And there were research papers that I'd sought out in the process of doing those experiments that actually gave me clues on where to go next. And that's also a very big part of research, is reading the literature. It's boring, but very helpful. And that's sort of how I got to the next part of my research project. I came up with something that actually worked. And so, I collected. So this is what I came up with anyway. I call it my scaffold. And it's basically a bunch of complex chemicals mixed together and squeezed out into a shape that looks a lot like a ball of spaghetti. And so the main structural component of this scaffold is called calcium alginate, which is, ironically, I find this quite funny. It's derived from algae. So I'm taking a derivative of algae and using it to clean up phosphorus, which then reduces algae. And you don't have to laugh. It's not really that funny, but... And so the other component of it, it's got two parts. The other component is the active ingredient, which is, don't worry, you don't have to remember this. It's magnesium aluminum layered double hydroxides. There won't be a quiz. And so with those two chemicals, they work together to absorb massive quantities of phosphorus. In fact, the one that I have pictured up there, that's just 1 gram of the scaffold. That can absorb enough phosphorus to clean 2 large boiler tanks full of contaminated water in just a few days for 4 cents. Very inexpensive as well. And so I also had, I have the scaffolds, but you gotta have some way to get them in the water. I couldn't just toss them in. So I also came up with an idea of how to implement the scaffolds using actually just stuff I bought at Walmart. And so this is what I came up with for a scaffold housing. It's a block of foam and some hair clips, and actually I don't have it pictured up there, but I cut the sleeve off of a men's extra large t-shirt and sewed it so that it would go around the outside when the clips are holding the scaffold and prevent the fish from eating them. That's necessary because fish are rather stupid. They're also very hungry. And so what I plan to do with these scaffolds is take them and float them in something called a stormwater detention pond. And so this is one pictured right up there, and it's basically a basin. You've probably seen them around towns. I know there's some in Bangor. And it takes the stormwater from a wide area and concentrates it into a single basin where it's held for about 2 weeks, and it allows the sediment to settle out, and that reduces some of the phosphorus. And so I'm taking advantage of this structure to also absorb phosphorus, the dissolved phosphorus, in my own way. And they could also be deployed in other places, like farm ponds or stormwater holding tanks, or even catch basins, which are below those storm grates you see, driving to work every day. And so these scaffolds are, so they be deployed in the detention ponds. But after that, well, what do you do with them? You've got a hunk of jelly stuff with phosphorus embedded in it. What can you do? Well, the answer lies in fertilizer. These scaffolds can potentially be recycled as slow-release fertilizer capsules, since the calcium alginate is actually biodegradable, and the phosphorus is absorbed as magnesium phosphate, which is a major component of fertilizer. So plant them with the crops, or even the house plants. It breaks down, releases the phosphorus, and the plants uptake it slowly at their own pace, as opposed to, you see everybody out there with the fertilizer pellets, just spraying them all over the garden. Well, those fertilizer pellets, they get washed into the stream, and that's part of where the phosphorus problem comes from in the first place. So that's, I think, a big component, I think an important component of environmental solutions in general, thinking about all of the different consequences that your actions may have. And, because one solution may cause another problem down the line, so you gotta think, sort of universally about it. And also thinking universally about making them multi-purpose, because as I mentioned before, E. coli is still an issue in Bangor streams. So this summer, I'm going to be working on also making them multi-purpose, making them so that they'll kill E. coli and other bacteria using silver nanoparticles, and also so that they'll absorb heavy metals, like the lead that's plaguing Flint, Michigan. And so that's, I'm not stopping here. And I'm hoping next year I'm going to be at Stanford University, which actually I'm very excited about because they have... Thank you. They have one of the biggest water research programs in the country. And so I want to turn this into a startup company, and I want to start to produce these scaffolds and provide them to municipalities and farms all over the country, and actually all over the world, because phosphorus isn't just limited to America. It's a problem in Australia, in China, in Latin America, pretty much anywhere. But none of this would have been possible without that STEM education. This is me as a 9th grader, right starting the STEM program. So that STEM education, kids start out naturally curious, naturally creative, children are, and those are really key attributes that a scientist or engineer should have. But there's a gap there between childhood and between professional research life that often isn't filled well enough by education. And that should really be the goal of STEM education, is to provide children with the tools that they need, the resources to learn how to become a researcher without losing their creativity and their curiosity, and not trying to squeeze them into a single way of thinking. Because we need different perspectives if we're going to create innovations for the future and help solve global climate change and other severe environmental issues. So for the kids out there in the audience, I have something for you. You are never too young to see a problem and try to fix it. And I say try because you will fail. I can guarantee that. The first time you try, you're probably going to fail, and again, and again, and again. But eventually, there often comes a success. And it's in that process of failure that you learn for the future, for how, so that you prize the success. But really, quite a few lessons can come from failure, and it's definitely a large part of scientific life and scientific research is experiencing that failure. And so also, I think is important is embracing irony, because I still find it very funny that I'm using something that's derived from algae to clean up algae. So think about it. What can you do to further STEM education and therefore innovation in Maine? Because it's only with STEM education that we can get to innovation. Thanks.